Welcome to another video. This video is going to focus on how to draw popcorn. And I'm going to show you how to do this by giving you some step-by-step instructions while I show you a time lapse of me working on this drawing. The materials that you will need are graphite pencils, sharpened to a long point. The reason for this is so that we can use the side of the graphite pencils if we need to. And I have a separate demo video on how to sharpen pencils to a long point if you need it. But the specific pencils that you should have on hand are a 2H, HB, 2B, and 4B. I suggest a drawing paper size of 9 by 12 inches. You'll need a gray kneaded eraser and some popcorn. The goals of this project are to learn how to draw popcorn by simplifying shapes and using alignments. You're going to create a value scale, and you're going to match and create values without using any blending tools. Now, the amount of popcorn you use is totally up to you. You could use one kernel or many kernels. Just make sure that you are being mindful of the composition, that you have a balanced composition, and you also want to make sure that there is a good lighting setup for your still life setup. So I suggest using one light source. I decided to sit next to a window, so I had light coming in from the window. But if you don't have that, you can use a lamp to create some shadows. Here you can see how I've set up my popcorn to draw. It's your choice whether you want to draw from life or if you want to photograph your setup and draw from the photo reference. I suggest if you want more of a challenge to draw from life. If you want less of a challenge, drawing from a photo is easier. But either way, make sure, for example, if you're going to photograph it, you are using your own setup and thinking about the composition when you photograph it. So don't use photos that you found online or someone else's photos. Use your own photo so that you can be in control of how you set up the popcorn, how much you zoom in or zoom out, how you light the popcorn to get shadows. I just put the popcorn on a blank piece of paper so that I could keep things simple. So here I'm going to show my time lapse of how I draw this arrangement of popcorn. And what I suggest that you do is start out with basic large shapes. So as you can see, I'm just laying in a sketch of some basic shapes for where the popcorn is going to sit. After I get the largest shapes down, and you can use the sighting technique to make sure the proportions and everything is looking good. I also use alignments with my pencil to see where things line up with each other. So I'm going back and forth between using alignments and using the sighting technique. But once I get the largest shapes down, as you can see now, I'm kind of breaking it down into medium-sized shapes. After I get the medium-sized shapes down, I'll break it down to the smallest shapes. But I'm keeping my lines rather angular at first because it's a way of simplifying the form before you start doing any line work that is specific to the organic nature of the shape. So I'm just keeping everything very geometric, very angular. I'm drawing with a very light touch so that as I make adjustments, it's easy to erase with my kneaded eraser. I'm also considering the cast shadows as shapes themselves. So they are, the cast shadows are part of the composition just as much as the positive space. And I'm just taking my time with this step. So don't rush this step. This is the building block for having a strong drawing where you're really just looking at placement and the size of these objects. and trying to get accuracy with that before you worry about the specific shape of the popcorn. And I'm just looking for any landmarks that I can use for alignments, such as, you know, if you look at a vertical imaginary line at the side of one piece of popcorn, where does that line up with another piece of popcorn? That's helpful information. Now, I'm drawing from observation, so I have my popcorn set up right in front of me. But even if you're working from a photo reference, you still want to spend a good amount of time trying to get accuracy with your proportions as you're drawing these simple geometric shapes. Now remember, if you're doing lots of adjustments with the size of things and stuff like that, your composition may change. So if the composition changes in such a way that it becomes weaker after you make your adjustments, you may have to rework everything to have a strong composition and accurate proportions. So you want both. That's why we keep things really simple at the beginning, because if you're making lots of adjustments, you're not wasting too much time trying to get real specific shapes of things. Now at this point in the drawing, I am starting to break down the medium shapes into smaller shapes. As you can see, I'm doing just a little bit of shading, not too much. I'm not really getting into shading yet, but I am kind of helping myself keep track of the different shapes by some of these darkest shadows. I'm just kind of making a note for myself of filling in a little bit where that is as I draw, because you're going to notice there's lots of lines going on the page, and it can be easy to lose track of what you're doing and where each shape is. So that's a helpful tip for keeping track, is you can kind of fill in some shapes wherever the darkest values are. So as you can see, even with those little kernels of popcorn, those little seeds, I'm keeping it fairly simple and geometric. I can always round out those shapes later, but when you start out more geometric, it just keeps things more accurate and simple at first, and then later you can be more specific about any type of organic lines. So you can see here, I'm sort of halfway through the drawing where I've gotten the line work the way I want it to with the placement and everything. I can certainly make the shapes more specific as I go, but if you're at this stage, it's okay to move on to the next step where we're going to do a value scale, so that as we add in value, we can have that scale nearby to see, you know, as we try to match the values to real life, we can see the wide range of value that we can get with the pencils. And also, if this is your first time working with value with graphite pencils, it's a way to test out your pencils and see how each of these pencils works a little bit differently. So I'm going to explain that here. All right, so I made myself a little value scale in the upper right-hand corner with 7 spaces, and I'm going to show you how I approach doing a value scale. I'm starting with my lightest lead, which is the 2H pencil, and I'm doing 1 coat over the entire thing. Actually 2 coats. Very, very light touch with the pencil. Now I did a little bit, I think I did a 3rd coat on that 2nd space from the left, and then the 3rd space I'm starting in with my next darkest pencil, which is the HB, and now I'm moving into 2B. So you can see each time I go to a different square, I'm just pulling that layer all the way to the right. So I'm kind of like layering on top. So I'm doing 2B again to get the next square a little bit darker, and then I got the 4B to do the last couple squares even darker. So I've got a range of value here. I kind of go back and fine tune everything to make sure that each box is definitely a different value. So if you want to like fine tune it, you can certainly go back and do that. But this is the layering technique where you use your lightest, smoothest leads first, such as a 2H, and then move to the HB, and then to the 2B, and then to the 4B. So in other words, if there's an area that's really, really dark that you know has to get really dark, you wouldn't want to go straight in with the 4B. You want to build up to it. And this kind of helps the application of those darker leads to go on more smoothly. Now, in my little setup here, I don't have too many areas that get super dark. So I'm definitely going to work for quite a while with the 2H and HB pencils. So I'm starting with the 2H anywhere that I see some of my darkest areas like the cast shadows and stuff like that. You can kind of see where I was using some alignments on my page, some vertical lines for checking the position of the popcorn kernels, and I will erase those soon as I move through the drawing, but I'm trying to get an even application of the graphite. Now, this is very important. You're not going to use any blending tools because blending tools oftentimes will flatten the form and make things too cloudy. Now, every artist has a different style and a different method of what they like to do, but the way I teach drawing with graphite pencils is without using blending tools. I think it's especially helpful for beginning drawing students to hold off on any blending tools and to learn how to control the pencil in such a way that you can still get an even application of the graphite without using a blending tool. And the way you do that is you use the side of the pencil lead with a very light touch, and you keep the pencil lines close together. And you can see here, I did one layer that went one direction, and then I did another layer on top that went another direction. So that's another thing that can help you get an even application, is if you layer certain areas with having your line work go in different directions. But the most helpful thing is keeping your lines close together so that you don't have too many gaps between your lines, so that the graphite will look nice and even in its application. So here you can see I'm already starting to get a range of value in my drawing, and I'm just layering to those darker values as I go. So you want to start with the 2H and then layer on top with the HB, and then if it needs to get darker than that, you go to your 2B, and then if it needs to get darker than that, then you go to your 4B. So you want to layer up slowly. And you want to have your kneaded eraser nearby in case you need to do any cleanup work, as you can see I'm doing there. And this is especially helpful for, cleaning up the edges of certain forms. If your pencil lines get a little bit messy, you can just clean it up with the eraser. So as you can see, now that we're adding value, things are really starting to look three-dimensional. And of course, as I go, if I see any areas that really need to be more specific in their shape or adjusted, I can just do that as I go through the drawing. But keep in mind that when you're trying to make things look three-dimensional and you start adding value, not every area, not every shape needs a bold outline. You can actually see that a lot of my outlines are very soft. I used a light touch when I created the forms with line, because sometimes the edge of a form can be described just by that value ending next to a different value, right? So that can show an edge where in that case you wouldn't even need a line to show the edge of a form. Because if your lines get too bold and heavy, it can actually flatten the form, because it can start to look a little bit more like a cartoon illustration. And we want this drawing to be more representational to life. So, when you look around at things in real life, not every edge of something has a sharp, dark outline, right? So we can show edges sometimes just with a change of value. Also keep in mind that, you don't have to have a photorealistic look with your drawing, right? If we wanted this to look like a photo, we would just take a photo of the popcorn, right? But that's not what we're doing. We're doing a drawing of the popcorn. So keep in mind that even though a lot of people who don't know much about art might be impressed by someone drawing something that looks photorealistic, it kind of defeats the purpose of doing the drawing, right? Because drawings look cool when they look like drawings, just like a painting looks cool when it looks like a painting, right? It's fun to use these materials in a way that shows off the material, right? So we can still get something that looks realistic and true to life, but also still looks like a drawing. It sort of retains that nature of a graphite drawing. We're not really trying to have it look like a photograph. Okay, so I would consider this a finished drawing. It's got a wide range of value. The forms look three-dimensional. I can recognize it as popcorn. As you can see, I've really shown the range of value when you look at my value scale up at the upper right-hand corner, and then I look back at the drawing. I feel like all those values are in there somewhere. So I've really tried to make the forms look three-dimensional. Also keep in mind while you're drawing that now that we're adding value, we're getting a lot of graphite on the paper. So you really want to try to avoid resting your hand on those areas that have graphite, because you could potentially smudge the graphite on the page. So if you need to rest your hand down on areas that you already have graphite, I suggest just using a separate piece of scratch paper, any kind of paper that you want to rest under your hand to protect the drawing from your hand, because our skin produces natural oils that can easily smudge or stain the paper or smudge the graphite on the paper. So in order to protect your drawing while you're working on it, that's what I recommend, to have something to protect the drawing from your skin if you're resting your hand down while you draw. But this is the finished product. So just to quickly review, basically what we did to draw the popcorn is utilize basic shapes and alignments for placement. So remember to start out with largest shapes first. Keep your forms fairly geometric at the start. And then once you have your largest shapes placed and sized correctly, then you move to breaking it down into medium shapes. And then you move to breaking it down into smaller shapes, and then detail and value last. All right. So I hope you found this demo helpful, and thank you so much for watching.